Welcome to the Job Shop Show, where we talk with the owners, suppliers, partners, and customers of custom manufacturers. Listen and learn the secrets of top-performing job shops, the tools, techniques, and backgrounds that have made them successful, all in the quest of raising the bar for custom manufacturing. I'm your host, Jay Jacobs. This episode is sponsored by Paperless Parts, connecting buyers and suppliers of custom manufactured parts. The Paperless platform is a secure, ITAR-compliant, cloud-based manufacturing system for suppliers that reduces the amount of time spent on sales, estimating, quoting, administration, and order processing. It offers seamless integration with the accounting and ERP software tools that shops already use, such as QuickBooks, E2, and JobBoss. Paperless Parts was founded with a mission to make manufacturing more accessible by streamlining the quote-to-cash process. Spend less time quoting and more time selling.
This episode is sponsored by our friends at the NTMA, the National Tooling and Machining Association. The NTMA is an association of privately held, entrepreneurial-based, and family-owned businesses representing nearly 1,200 small to mid-sized machine shops and tool and die shops across the country. They have approximately 30 very active regional chapters that host local events, run apprenticeship programs, and provide other services to their regional members. As an association of peers, the goal of the NTMA is to help members of the U.S. precision custom manufacturing industry achieve profitable growth and business success in a global economy through networking, workforce development and training, technology, best practices education, advocacy, programs, and services with industry partners. To learn how your company can get involved with the NTMA, including how to join, visit ntma.org.
Shazam! This is Jay Jacobs. Welcome to the Job Shop Show. It is a hot summer day, so I'm escaping to the AC to record another conversation with an owner who has an incredible resume of job shop experience. We're really honored to have on today Grady Cope of Reata Engineering and Machine Works in Denver, Colorado. Not only is he the owner of a very successful multi-dimensional machine shop, starting from ground zero 23 years ago, he is the past president of the NTMA and a founder of the Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Association. We're going to discuss some of the ways saying yes has led him to some wonderful opportunities, explore how he generates 70% of Reata's sales from out-of-state customers, why they like Mazak equipment, and for older shop owners thinking of or starting the transition of their shop to others, how Grady is approaching turning over the leadership reins to a younger generation. Welcome to the Job Shop Show, Grady.
Good to be with you, Jay. I'm looking forward to talking about the job shop world.
Well, one thing that I noticed, even though the podcast is audio, we are recording Zoom in video, and there's a picture of Richard Feynman on the wall behind you. Why Richard Feynman?
Well, Richard Feynman
and maybe you could say, tell folks who he is.
Richard Feynman is one of my heroes. Richard Feynman was a physicist that did amazing stuff. He worked with Oppenheimer and Einstein on the atomic bomb and through that whole era. But he has several books out that describe his curious nature. And he was always looking at everything, whether it be ant farms to plants to early on, the doctors couldn't diagnose his wife with tuberculosis. And he ended up developing the diagnosis of his wife for tuberculosis and dealing with all of those things. And he's just an interesting person all the way up to where most people remember him. He was the one that's testifying to Congress on the Discovery shuttle explosion on the O-rings, and he's the one that threw the O-ring in the glass of water to Congress, explaining things to him. But he's just an incredible character, and I encourage anybody to go read any of his books. You will laugh and be entertained. Evidently, there was seating room only or standing room only in his lectures when he was teaching at California.
Well, I second that. The stories in his books are amazing, and he was such a interesting person beyond being an incredible physicist. What was he, a master, I'll say, locksmith or lock picker?
Yeah.
And they describe the picking of the locks on the file cabinets at Los Alamos, and
Got in trouble for that.
got in trouble for that. He was a painter and a prolific drummer.
Drummer,
So
yes, he did. He took up drumming. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, just one of those incredible people that was curious about everything. And I think, we as human beings should always be curious and asking why are things the way they are, and how can we
hmm
change them up. And so I've always I've thought of him that way. And of course, the picture I have is the Apple advertising campaign picture of him, and I've always thought that fit.
great. Well, that probably is there to remind you to be curious. And I think being curious is a hallmark of your career in manufacturing. I thought it'd be interesting to have you share, if you could, with the listeners what you've accomplished in 23 years of owning a manufacturing company. You now have a team of roughly 50 people running 24/7 in a 25,000 square foot building. You're catering mostly to aerospace and medical, but let's start at the beginning. How did Reata come to be?
So when I graduated from high school, I did not want to go to college. So my parents agreed to let me go to a trade school for automotive and diesel mechanics, and I did that, and that launched my career down in South Texas, where in the early 80s, in 1980, I went to work offshore for Halliburton Services, and
Mm,
I did that for 5 years. And then I realized, I was ready to come back and go to college and get my engineering degree, which I did. I came back to Colorado, I got my engineering degree, and when I graduated, I went to work for the Gates Corporation, and I was a synchronous belt development engineer. And I did that for 5 years, and I realized that I did not fit into the corporate world. It just wasn't something for me in the way I was built. And we used to give our parts and machines to be made out
hmm
to a gentleman that would come by, and he was a rep, and he kept bugging me because he knew I was miserable, saying, "Well, you should start a machine shop." I said, "I don't know anything about a machine shop. I know nothing.
Right.
I've been in the Gates one a few times." And one day he called and he said, "Hey, I found you a manual lathe and a manual mill, and for $6,000, you need to come buy it, and I know where we can set it up for you so you can learn to be a machinist."
hmm
So I put that $6,000 on my credit card. A guy had just started a shop earlier that year, and I wired the machines up and installed them in that shop. And between him, the owner of that shop, and the person who convinced me to do it, they gave me my early training for a few hours, and my mechanical skills filled in. And so at night I would go be a machinist, and at day I would go be an engineer at Gates. And about 3 or 4 months later, they said, "You're never going to make it in this machine shop world if you don't quit your job." So I listened to them and I quit. And the next day, here I was trying to make a living out of a machine shop, which was interesting. I mean, if you think about it, when you start from that way,
hmm
every drill, every end mill, everything you buy is the first one. You don't have anything. So you buy them. And later that year, I hired my first employee, and I knew that was my beginning of my learning experience of management when the machinist showed up with more mills in his box than I had. Realizing now that machinists never buy mills, but
Yeah.
that's kind of how it started. And about 9 months later, I bought my first CNC, and we've progressed through those years, and to now to where there's lot of people a lot smarter than me out there running machines and making parts.
Well, I want to just comment on a couple things. Well, one is
Hmm.
that you are the classic story in starting a business on a credit card, number one, right? You always
Yeah,
hear about that. People maxing out their credit cards. And what year was that you
it was
did that?
1993 is when I did that. Yeah,
Okay. So actually, I had that wrong. So you more than 23 years, 27 years now.
27 years in
Yeah.
October. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So you back then, 93, $6,000 is different than it is today. So
yeah.
you probably did max a credit card to do that.
I
um,
did.
and I think it's really interesting, and I want to talk about this later, but you said yes to the manufacturer's rep to buy the equipment, to
Hmm.
try this. And then you said yes again to quitting your job and doing this full time. And there was no clear path of success either time, but it's almost to what I've felt in my career. There's just something inside you. You have to do this. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, that was exactly. I mean, it's what I tell young entrepreneurs when they want to know every possible thing that could go wrong, or everything they need to know. And my comment was in those days I knew that I wanted to do something different. I mean, it could have been anything. Machining was one of the experiences. It had to be something where I worked with my hands, because I mean, that's how I was raised, and that's how I came up. But if somebody told you everything that you needed to know, nobody would ever do this. So you go into these kind of blind, but there's something in your gut, in the back of your head, saying, I can do this. And it's just, I mean, one of the things that his name was Ben, told me, he says, Grady, owning your own business, you'll have the highest highs and the lowest lows.
Hmm.
Just know that they'll switch. The only thing he didn't tell me was it could occur 5 minutes apart. But the reality is that's what doing it. As long as you're comfortable with going in, and that's where I was. I just getting up and doing the same thing every day in the corporate world, and where I was, I basically, after 5 or 6 hours, there was nothing else for me to do. So I had more time not to work, and it was really frustrating. Where when you're an entrepreneur starting up, there's never enough hours.
Right.
You may not be making. I wasn't making the kind of money I was then, and I probably had a lot more stress, but I was a lot happier.
Yeah. So the rep pursued you. He saw something in you,
Mhm.
but you located your equipment within another shop. How did that conversation go with that shop owner to convince him to give you space?
So they were friends. They had
Hmm.
worked together a long time, and the shop owner, and we've moved around the Denver metro area, and he's still just up the street from me where he moved. So if you talk to him today, he would describe himself as, his goal in life is to teach other people how to go on and start their own business and things like that. And so he was really encouraging, and we developed a really good friendship. And to this day, I mean, we do different kind of work,
Hmm.
but I'll still give Rich work to this day that we have an overload for, and we still carry on, and we have lots of stories going back to all those years. The good news is we're two businesses that have made it through all that time, and we both started off, with no money,
Mm.
and just people encouraging us, and in those early days, it was other shops that would give us work and help. And he taught me what I needed to know about machining at that time, and he taught me how to quote and things like that. So he was a real mentor for me at that time.
Yeah. Today you offer within your company milling, turning, assembly. Can you give us a little more complete picture of where you are today in the services?
Sure. So we're definitely one of those shops that's high mix, low volume. About probably between 60 and 70% of our business right now is medical. Well, actually, with the pandemic,
Mm.
it's way more medical. The aerospace is kind of dried up to speak of it. We did a lot of airplane work, but we started with just turning and milling, and we've continued to add technology to where we've got multitasking machines. We've got palletized horizontals, Mazak Palatex, and we've got uh, 5-axis machining. So we've kind of transformed along the way of adding that kind of equipment. And then we've started adding more and more assembly work, because it's a little easier to compete when you're competing on entire assemblies, and convincing customers that it's a lot less parts for them to inspect when they're getting a whole assembly or sub-assembly rather than the assembly.
Well, let's dive a little deeper into that, because I'm sure there's a lot of shop owners listening who make more parts than assemblies, and assemblies may seem daunting as
Mhm.
a service to sell. How, what would you say to a shop owner who wants to start offering assemblies to their customers, but not sure where to start? How do they get going?
Well, first off, they need to know that when they're looking at assembly, what they're selling themselves to that customer is essentially a one-stop solution. You're the solution because yeah, you need to pay attention because you're going to be cash flowing things that
Mm,
aren't metals and plastics. You're going
mm,
to be buying maybe electronic components. You're going to be buying hardware and things that are going to go in their assemblies. But the goal is to try to convince the customer that by you doing that, providing that, the customer is not going to have as many part numbers to order, that you're going to really reduce their level of work. Now,
hmm
most of them know that. They just would love to have the opportunity to find a shop that's willing to take on the assembly work. But that said, you have to know that you're going to have to hire some people, and your quality department's going to have to change a little bit because they're going to have to start inspecting a lot more things coming in from the outside, but also know how assemblies together. Documentation has to become one of your primary characteristics so that you can get the assemblies assembled every time and document how that's done so that there's a whole process behind that.
Where can shop owners go to learn about the process to find out? There must be particular tools to help you develop instruction sets, or are you just homegrown?
No, we're engineer. I'm an engineer and I lean heavily. I would say if you don't have any engineers working in your company, hire even some out of college because
Mm,
uh, in a lot of regards they're the best at documenting and putting together processes like that. Now your customers may have a process already in place because they've been doing it, and
mhm,
they will be happily share that with you. But just know that their process is going to have some holes in it, and you're going to have to fix it because what happens in all places is there's that the a machinist's best friend is a really good assembly person because a machinist might not be deburring something properly, but that assembler always deburs it and never tells anybody and gets parts to
mm.
work together. Well, now it's your problem to figure out all those little things that maybe an outside assembly person helped with.
So it sounds like you shouldn't try to take your machinist and have him do assembly or her.
No, that is the wrong area to go. I mean, we did it with young engineers is how we started
Gotcha.
off to create it. So,
And
and it continues to develop because at some point the assembly's get involved where now the customer wants you to do some testing on them or
ah,
calibration on them. And
gotcha.
so they get more sophisticated and
You mentioned cash flow too, and that's a great point, is that you are buying items that may sit around for, say, 30 days, or whether they're catalog items or you're even buying from other shops who they tell you to buy from.
right,
So you've got to buy those and have those on hand before they're assembled, and then you don't get paid for whatever your terms are with your customer.
right,
So
right.
what sort of cash flow things do you have to think about? Or do you have to figure another 30 days of the total assembly cost or of the purchase? What's your rule of thumb?
Right, right. So you can try. I mean, yeah, there's been some stuff that was just, ridiculously priced that it wouldn't make sense for us to cash flow. And so you can work with your customer and say, look, we'll cash flow this. Will you
Mm-hmm.
front this component? And we've had
Gotcha.
some customers provide, and in fact, most customers, some really expensive stuff. If it's a good customer and your customer should be good, they'll say, hey, is this going to cause you grief? Can we help on that?
Mm,
And they'll help you cash flow some of this stuff. And then as you grow and you grow that business, you need to pay attention because if the assembly is you know $35,000 a piece and you're used to selling parts that are $35 a piece, you need to think about that and understand that a lot of that money is probably not from machine parts, it's from purchase
right.
price parts, and you need to plan for that. And that's why I think another component to doing assemblies is having a good CFO on board.
Do you try to get the same margin on parts as you do for assemblies, or do you back off some of the margin on the purchase components?
We tend to mark up the purchase components all the same, and that usually, we usually will do it somewhere between 18 and 25%. So where we'll get
And
our
that's your markup.
that's our markup, but not, and we, in this particular case, we don't add margin to those
Mm-hmm.
markup. The margin then that we would get would be on our machined parts and on any assembly work we do.
So I think it's important be, because the numbers, sometimes people hear, oh, 25% markup. But let's say you buy a part for $1 and you mark it up 25% and you sell it for $1.25. That 25 cents divided by $1.25 is now a 20% margin, which is not the same as markup.
Right,
So I
right.
just want to put that out
Yep,
there for shop
yep,
owners to make sure
yep.
you're thinking the markup is not margin.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And the key to that is, and this is why you need to be careful, because you may have to modify those components.
Mm.
So you can
Yeah.
lose
Yeah.
all of that money. So you have to think about each individual thing of what's my risk. And
Right.
it's just like if you're, you know, if I would say on the majority of our machine parts that we make, the material cost is probably somewhere between 18 and 20% of the entire cost of the part.
Hmm.
Well, if I have a machine part that I'm making and the material cost is, 70% of the cost, I need to really think about that, because if I lose a part, I may not, it may take me, a lifetime to get that back. And that's really multiplied on assembly parts to where
Hmm.
you need to pay
Yeah.
attention to what you're doing.
In your shop, you mentioned the Mazak, and before the podcast, we had talked about, I think it was starting in 2011, you primarily added Mazaks. Can you
Mhm.
just talk about that a little bit?
Well, so we knew it because of the mix of parts we had. We knew that we needed a multitasking machine, and we had gone. This was just coming out of the recession, so I'll say our balance sheet wasn't the greatest in the world either at that point. But
Hmm.
we knew we needed that type of technology on our floor to really help us. At that time, I was also the chairman of NTMA, so we were traveling around. The president of NTMA and myself were traveling around to our basically our partners that helped fund the association, and we had the chance to go to Kentucky and visit Brian Papke at Mazak. And Brian just asked me, he says, "Well, how come you haven't quoted Mazak?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't, I don't know you all very well, and I don't even know your distributor very well there in
Mm.
town." And he said, "Why? I think you should look at us." And I don't think I landed back in Denver and walked in my company, and there were like three people from the distributor and Mazak in there ready to quote, and they quoted and worked a deal, and I think Brian and Mazak probably even we did the financing through Mazak. I think I know that Brian and Mazak co-signed on it for us to get it in the shop. And that machine wasn't in the shop, but probably 2 or 3 months, and we started looking at its contribution to, it was probably producing 30%
Hmm.
of what we made in the shop.
Wow.
And I was just going like, we need to look at this type of technology. And so 2 years later, I went back down and visited Brian and said, I want to add a horizontal pallet thick and another Integrex. And he worked with us again, and we added that. And it's been a really good relationship. I've, over the years, I've shared my data and presented my data of what it did to us. And it kind of takes me back to when I was NTMA's chairman. I toured you toured everybody's shop around the country, and I would go in shops that they had a bunch of vertical machines just like me, and their biggest problem was they were struggling like all of us. Their biggest problem to growth was they couldn't find enough people to get in front of the machine. So
Mm.
so there's 10 or 20 verticals, and most of them were sitting because they
Mm,
they have to sit because they need to
right.
be tended to. And then I would go to shops that had switched over to more of the higher technology equipment. And a lot of those would say, well, we don't have any debt. We cash flow these machines.
Hmm.
And and it was, and it wasn't just one, it was several. And of course, there's very few of the shops doing it that way. And so I knew that I wanted to, over time, become that kind of a shop. And so we worked really hard at Reata and added, we just, in the worst part of the pandemic on April 1st, we'd been waiting a year. We just installed a new 40 pallet I300 from Mazak.
Mm.
It's a huge learning curve, but it'll do the work of three verticals. So rather than needing 12 people to run it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I need four. And that's a lot easier to find.
So I'm getting a sense of how your shop has changed since you brought the Mazak equipment in, but could you be more concrete in saying this is the type of shop I was in 2010 or 11, and
Right.
what type of shop you would say you are now, and so that I can understand what the equipment, how it has changed your shop.
So in 2010, 2011, we were mostly a one shift. We had a little bit of people on a weeknight shift. And we certainly weren't working 7 days a week.
Hmm.
We, yeah, it's been hard, but it's it's gotten progressively harder to be able to find people to staff, let alone skilled personnel. And so that was, you could you couldn't grow, and the only way you could grow is add another vertical, but then you needed more
Mm.
people,
Yep.
and you really would rather have those spindles turning, and it just was this never ending process of, you just couldn't make money, or not very much money doing that, because you couldn't, and then you couldn't meet customers' demands, and customers would split orders between places to get stuff done.
Gotcha.
So once we started adding that, I always say the left side of the shop was totally automated, and the right side of the shop was where we put all the old machines. So that allowed us all of a sudden to start running 24/7, and even some of that 24/7 unattended, with the palletizing machines and bar feeders. And so we were able to find, and the one thing is, also, when you add the more modern equipment like that, you can find people that want to learn or work on that kind of equipment.
Gotcha.
And so
Yeah.
it brought a new type of person into the shop. Now, I will tell you, on most of that equipment, if you came in my shop, you'd see that they were all really, really young people. And that
Hmm.
really started attracting the youth, and kind of adopting our culture over to youth. The other thing is if you go around and look at the spindle uptime on that equipment, it's always in the 70s to low 90s. If you go look on my vertical side of the shop, it's going to be in the, well, hopefully it's in the 20s. Um, you know, but maybe if you're running a long running job or something, you'll get it up there. But I would say I would never assume I'm going to have more than spindle uptime of 33%. So you go to the automated shop. There's a very few
Mm.
people down there, and all the machines are running. You go to the vertical side of the shop, or the two-axis lathe side of the shop, and there's 7 or 8 people standing down there, and maybe one or two spindles turning. Big
That
difference.
that's a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to get to, you mentioned you were the chairman of the NTMA,
Mm-hmm.
and that helped you discover Mazak, or Mazak discover you.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe it was the act of saying yes that eventually got you into the role of being chairman for the NTMA. So how did that mindset get you involved, I guess, first of all, with the NTMA or any other organizations that may have preceded that?
Back in college, when I was in college, I got involved with ASME and moved up into leadership roles, and just realized how valuable the experience it was in those. So when I started Reata, probably 2 years into it, another shop owner we were doing work for, he said, you know, maybe you should look at this organization. It's a pretty good organization. You can learn from other people and network with people in your industry. And I think you'd be a good fit. And I said, sure. And I joined, and there was a local chapter here. And for some reason, I never got put on the local chapter's fax list. So they would fax out their meeting notices, and I never got their meeting notices. And then one day, and I don't know, probably 2003 or four, I got a call, and they were saying, "Hey, we're really struggling. We need leaders in the chapter, and we'd like to make you an officer." And I said, "I've never been to a chapter meeting. You don't even know me." And they said, "Well, that's where we are." And so I agreed and got involved, and it was a great group of people, and got to know a lot more people just around, the Denver metro region, and it was extremely valuable. And every year, one of the chairman would come and speak, and one of them got a hold of me after I introduced and spoke and said, "You really need to start coming to these national conferences." And he later became my best mentor of all. And I went, and it was an incredible experience to be with all these people nationally, big and small, and to be able to network and communicate with them. And it wasn't very long after that I was put onto the executive team and learned that. And I was probably I was the smallest company on the executive team. First, I was intimidated, but then I realized they all have the same problems. They all have the same issues that small and big have. They're just more numbers behind it.
Mm.
But most of them were older than me, so they all became mentors, and I was able to learn from them, and it developed my confidence. And actually, Reata started running better because of my participation on that executive team. And when I became chairman, I found that it's one thing to lead your company, but it's another thing to lead your peers.
Mm.
And once you lead your peers, you can develop the tools and techniques and confidence to be able to do whatever you need to do to make your business run as well.
So what is the difference between leading your company and leading your peers, and how did that make you a better leader at Reata?
Well, early on, I mean, sometimes leadership in your own company is dictatorial.
Mm-hmm.
You say, and people do. That doesn't work so well if you're working with your peers. You have to develop some consensus. You also have to develop a very thick skin, because you're not going to, the decisions you make as a leader and a leadership team out an organization like that are not going to make everybody happy. And you can imagine, I was on that team during the 2008 and 9 recession. We had to make a lot of really hard and tough decisions during that period of time. So you develop a fairly thick skin, but you don't let maybe people's comments or feelings or what they say. You learn how to not allow that to many times it's their frustration. It's not about you, and you learn to work with those people and try to understand their perspective as much as, and explain the perspective you're coming from. Well, if you take that back to your business, and I always say, if we want to implement anything here at Reata, we can, on the carpet side of the company, we can say and do whatever we want.
Right.
If you go out there, you got to get the concrete to buy in. If you get the concrete side to buy in, nothing but positive things will happen.
Yep.
And that's what I learned more than anything is how do you get ideas or transformations to happen with everybody. And trust me, I learned the hard way as NTMA chairman. I think to this day I may be the only chairman that had an issue voted down in the trustees meeting. I attempted to change the M in NTMA from machining to manufacturing, and I was soundly defeated. And I thought it was an easy decision and a slam, and I was wrong, and I should have done more work up front to make that happen.
I'm getting a couple things out of here. Number one is said yes in uncomfortable situations. And people have heard me talk on the podcast before about strategic coach, and Dan Sullivan has something he calls the 4 C's, which is sort of a flywheel in itself. And the first C is you make a commitment. And then the second C is you have to have the courage to actually follow through on your commitment. And so you made the commitment and you then followed through. You had the courage to follow through, even though it was uncomfortable. Then the third C is you gain capability. And by gaining that capability, it gives you confidence, the 4C. And now you have more confidence. And so you can perhaps say yes to a bigger thing, where if they'd asked you to be chairman of NTMA when you just first came out of the Colorado office, that would have been too daunting.
Right. I just wouldn't have been able to do it. And
Right.
and the thing about that is I have now so many people across the country that I can call and ask questions to. I have multiple mentors that have helped me and helped develop me, and now hopefully I can become that role to other young people in NTMA, and as things change, you know, hopefully I change with them and can give back some of what I got out of that organization and the people, mostly the people. I mean, it's always about the people.
Yeah.
Always about
Yeah.
the people.
Well, that's something else I get out of it. And beyond the ability to give back through an organization like the NTMA, which is great in itself, but even for perhaps a selfish reason, to join an organization, if you want to become a better leader in your own shop, even I guess your own family, it is probably worthwhile to join an organization where you have to lead your peers and figure out those tools, because they are so transferable back to other parts of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So, well,
It,
thanks for
it,
doing that.
yeah, it's probably, you know, we all have, you know, inflection points in our life, and for me that would be a big inflection point in my life for me personally and for my business. So
Yeah. The Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Association was something that I believe you co-founded.
yeah, I was a founding board member when I finished up my NTMA executive team. As I came off of that, Colorado was working with the governor of Colorado on trying to define advanced manufacturing in Colorado, and I got involved.
Hmm.
And the governor helped fund our association early on, and we created a statewide association. And I had seen statewide associations in the Midwest that were really successful and did some great things. The one in Dayton, Ohio would be the one I would hold out the best in terms of
Really?
how
Okay.
they were able to do locally. And you know, that's what we worked to create there, to where we could provide, you know, shops big and small and medium size, the tools and information they needed from a local manufacturing level. And it wasn't just job shops, you know, it was OEMs and everything else. And so it was just the beginning of the sharing of this information, and that uh, ultimately launched us into what we've got as our workforce development out of here. And that's, you know, that's changed again because of my participation in that. That's changed Reata and where we're headed with workforce. But again, it's people coming together and networking and learning
Did
about each
you
other.
did you actively seek that out, or were you approached?
In this case, I was approached.
Yeah. And same
Right,
thing
right.
with the NTMA.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot like many going back to when you started the company. You said yes, and I don't know. Have you ever heard of the book or read the book, The Surrender Experiment by Mickey Singer?
I have not. I have not.
So he incredibly successful businessman, and he decided early on in his life he would just sort of follow the things that came along and say yes. to surrender, to rather than saying this is the plan, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, this is for some reason, whether you want to say God or some other power has just ordained that this is a path I have to follow, and rather fight it, he surrendered to it. And it sounds almost like that's what you have done in your career, in your life, in your journey.
Yeah, it has, and maybe there are times I wish I would have fought it, but I would say for the most part, as I look back on things now, these were all things that helped me and my career and my family and my business, and I'm glad I took time to, because you will always find and people that'll say, well, I don't have time for that, I got to run my
Right.
business. And the problem is okay, you're working in your business, these things force you to work on your business, and they force you to talk about your business to other people. But what you ultimately find out is these people have either A, are having the same problems you are, or they've had them already and solved them, and this is what they did.
Mhm.
And I always say there's these cycles, and if you own a business long enough, and if you find somebody that it was all straight up and they never had any you know uh, puckering moments of hoping they were going to stay in business, they either weren't in business very long before they transacted or whatever. But you go through this sinusoidal period of time, and a lot of times they're your own mistakes that you have to learn from.
Yeah.
But you're going to go down to one of these points to where you know you might lose your business, you might lose it. And people always say, well, why is it that the bank always has to come and take the business away from small business owners? I say, because up until the day and the second that bank comes, they believe they're going to solve the problem and get out of it. That's the most amazing thing about entrepreneurs. When you go through these curves like that, it's nice to know other people that have been there and they said, oh, you'll get out of it. You just got to focus and work your way through those bad times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's literally, that's the mental part of business that sometimes you need a friend to help you with.
Yeah. Do you have a board of advisors?
I don't.
It sounds you have more like an informal, perhaps,
Yeah, I
board then.
do. For many years, I was involved with tech or Vistage, and I
Mm-hmm.
did that, and that was a great set of people, and I keep in contact. But the people that are my advisors now are professional people associated with the business, but also just other owners I've developed a relationship. I would tell you that as I move on and forward, it's on my list of that we have to develop an outside board of advisors, because I'm not giving my company over to family or anything else like that.
Mm.
But at some point, I need to develop an exit strategy, and those type of people will help me do that, and also help the company go to the next level beyond me.
That is an area I wanted to explore with you, what
Mhm.
your role is now, and that sounds like that's the turning over of the leadership reins and the future of Reata is part of your role. What other things occupy you today, or do you? I know we don't always get to spend the time where we want, but where do you try to spend your time?
Well, where I try and where I should spend my time is on that. What is the most important thing that Riata needs right now,
Mm-hmm.
and for the rest of its life are people, the right people in the right places. So I'm constantly looking to make sure we have our leadership team, you know, with enough, different abilities across all disciplines, to where they don't necessarily always have to agree, but they have to be able to share and exchange information to help make Riata better, and make it so that, my goal probably for the last 2 years and going forward is, how do we make Riata run so that it doesn't need me?
Hmm.
If it doesn't need me, then I've pulled all the right buttons and levers to make it
What's some
happen.
of the progress you've made in the last 2 years to get to that point?
The first component that I did, and he chose me, was I had a part-time CFO that
Hmm.
worked for an accounting firm in here and was helping me through I'll say a Reata recession, because it wasn't a recession that had
Hmm.
anything to do with outside. And he worked with me in the bank, and probably on the worst day of my life, he came and said, I think I'd like to come and work for you full time. And
Hmm.
I kind of laughed. I said, nobody knows the books better than you. How would you make this work? And he did, and it was the best decision. So I hired a full-time CFO that
Hmm.
really knew the stuff, and he took that apart away from me, so I didn't have to worry about it. I mean, I get to see my numbers, I get to look, I'm in the
Hmm.
loop, I know everything, but not having to worry about that part of the business, and now focusing on development of people, things like that. It changed everything and made me realize that now I needed to do that. We fired a young production manager that I I see big things out of, and so I'm excited as we add these people, and as we're also working with CareerWise, which is developing apprenticeship programs, and we've got a high school right over here where my people and my apprentices go over and help, that has 60 students when they were up and running, all learning to machine and do that. We've had this summer, I think we had like 9 high school interns or apprentices in here working. So bringing the youth on is a big role of mine. And then my role is just making sure we get the right business into the business at the right time, and then monitoring what technology we had. I mean, I may be old, but I'm a geek. Knows me, they know I'm going to buy a new iPhone every year and all the other stuff, and I'm going to screw around with whatever technology's out there. Well, I do the same thing with Reata. I have a
Hmm.
CFO now that stops me a little bit, but 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 I think that technology is where the job shop world is headed, and we need to pay attention to that, because that is the thing that's going to define whether you continue to exist as a shop going forward, or as a business going forward, or whether you get taken out. And there's if you watch the trends out there, there are things that there are Amazons in our world that are going to take us out if we're not careful, and don't pay attention to what we need to do to make ourselves more efficient and bigger and better. People, technology, and just that maybe saying yes as you go forward to seeing what other things can come into your life out there to make it work.
So I'm curious about, you say technology because that's so broad. Are you talking in the front office, on the floor, uh, or other aspects? What do you think is critical for, like, let's break it down. What's critical now? If the shop isn't thinking about implementing this in the next year or two, they're in trouble. And then what's more cutting edge or something you have to be thinking about implementing in the next 3 to 4 years? Or let's just what like to really you're spending time on this. Hear your thoughts on what is appropriate for a shop.
Well, several things, and you have to take, I think, a holistic approach for it. You have to look at and bring automation into the shop floor. One, to be competitive, but two, you need spindles and things happening 24 hours a day,
Hmm.
and you probably can't afford to have a person in front of every machine, let alone can you find all those people to grow your business. So that type of technology, which is interesting and changing, and that's why you should work with your favorite machine tool manufacturer to learn, and go to their classes and schools and learn, and develop along with that. And we've Mazak's been a wonderful partner with us, and that's a future, and the distributor now is right behind us, and they kind of use us as a showroom to show off some of the
Mm.
machines, and we love being able to do that, because the more job shops that get this kind of equipment, the more money the machine tool manufacturer can make, and the more things they can develop to watch that going forward. the other side of it, which people forget, is the software side. And I'm not just talking about the CAD CAM systems. Yes, they're amazing, and you should go into the most technical versions of those to work with the machines you have, and have your guys learn how to use those in the most
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated ways, because shops are digital now, but they're becoming even more digital, where some companies you don't even see a 2D print. Everything's coming 3D, so you've got to be able to move that 3D through your entire
Mm-hmm.
shop process quickly. But the part that I don't think people focus on enough now is the automation of, let's call it the digitization of the shop. The whole shop needs to become digital, and paperless part is a great example of how software can start to transform your life. I mean, and even your customer's life, because it's not just changing the shop, it's changing the customer's way of how they're looking at your quotes or proposals. It's changing the way that you can communicate throughout the entire company to give everybody's input onto a part or a quote. It's automating that process so that we all expect Amazon to either deliver the same day, the next day, or 2 days. If it's worse than that now, it's wrong. Well, if you don't think our customers aren't going to expect their quotes and their parts in those type of that cadence, it's coming. I mean, it changed ever since the fax machine, and it just keeps compressing. And
Mm-hmm.
so tools like paperless parts and hopefully somebody out there will develop an ERP system that copies that same technology and technique.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those are the things that are going to allow the shops to change. And then the monitoring software, the machine metrics that you can start. So now there's all this stuff that we can get, all the data we can look at. And I've said all along that, if we can measure it, then we can change it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can go off my gut, and I've been right, but now there's so much information out there. You need to look at what do we need to measure, and what do we need to monitor, and how can we use that data to launch ourselves to the next level. And of course, then my other speech that goes along with that is that, guys, because everybody will get focused on the data, is much better for us to be approximately correct than exactly wrong. And and I stole that from Ellie
Well,
Goldratt
so
from
and
POC.
I'll throw out and my CTO said, or exactly right, because if you're spending that much time to be exactly right, you're wasting time and energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Right. But that's what's going to transform our companies now is having that data at our fingertips, so that we know what lever to pull and button to push, and don't just decide on a whim that it's time to add equipment,
Right.
especially when you have no idea if your machines are running at the rates they should. And it's just time for job shops to really take a look at that. For the longest time, all of this was thought, well, the OEMs needed this. It just didn't trigger down to us. But this is how you make yourself competitive, and will improve that cash flow, which is the number one thing that job shops suffer from.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that on technology.
Sure.
I think that was a great synopsis. You probably also spend some of your time on business development, and you had shared that 70% of your sales happen outside of Colorado. That's not typical within a job shop to have sales outside of a 50, 100, 150-mile radius. So is that deliberate, or just happen?
No, it's deliberate. I mean, one, Colorado is not like the Midwest, or not like the Northeast, or California. We don't have OEMs lined up looking for bunches of job shops. There's work here, and it's great. But I decided early on that I wanted to diversify out of Colorado, because the majority of what we make you can hold in one or two hands, and shipping is just,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't cost that much. And so I deliberately said, let's go out. And I didn't want to hire reps, so I hired outside salespeople that worked for Reata
Hmm.
and focused. And the first one I hired was in the California area, and he brought on a bunch of California companies for us to work with. And then he moved, and the region he lived in at that point, and then it just kind of started spreading from there. I worked on the Midwest and the East Coast
Hmm.
in terms of finding business, and Colorado can be fairly competitive. And one of my sales techniques always with the customers, it's not a bad place to come visit every once in a while, especially in the winter if you want to ski or something,
Sure.
So so it's just a matter of going out there and doing it. And the best example I have of people go, yeah, but if you have quality issues, it becomes hard. We have a customer, our biggest customer in the Pittsburgh area, and 3 o'clock
Hmm.
one afternoon in Colorado, they called me with a problem, and I said I'd be there the next day. And I got on a plane and I flew that night, and I was at their 8:30 meeting to help solve the problem.
Wow.
And they said that they didn't think the shop down the street would get there that quick, but
Yeah.
it proved that you can do whatever you need to do to service out people outside the state.
So obviously a commitment to be responsive like that. You have direct salespeople. Do they, you mentioned the fellow in California, do the others typically live in the territory they cover, or do they fly into it?
They
How-
they fly into it. They
Yeah.
fly into it. I mean, the key there is just marketing and following leads and following people as they move in industries. You
Hmm.
know, following the people you've worked with all along and keep building upon those.
You say marketing. How do you market in a territory that's not your own?
Well, digitally, I mean now more than ever through LinkedIn. Just sending emails out and trying to.
So is it a lot of identification of targets by the salespeople and then the email or connecting through LinkedIn or things
Mhm,
like that? That's what
mhm.
you're okay.
Right. I mean, the whole goal for me, I probably, as younger people come on, it won't be, but for me, and you can't, this is the longest I haven't traveled, but
Right.
for me, is if you can get me in the door and I can sit next to that person, I know that I can convince them to give us a chance or give us a try. That's probably changing, and it will definitely change after the pandemic. I mean, Zoom will become a much more common way of probably working with and dealing with people, and that's fine. I mean, we've we've done that during the pandemic. We've brought new customers on, and
Hmm.
they've never seen our shop or we've seen each other face to face on Zoom, and it's worked out fine. And I think that's again technology changing, but there still is a need for people out there in the type of work we do, and especially to deal with problems and issues, and customers want to be paid attention to. And I think if you pay attention to them, you can, you know, when things are going good, we're all the same. It's how you perform when
Right.
you screw up,
Yep.
and that's what makes a relationship forever with the customer is that performance you did to overcome the problem you caused.
It makes me think on the flip side, before the pandemic, there were all sorts of people calling on job shops. You have the material suppliers, the tooling suppliers, whatever else. Do you let those people in your shop now, or is it reduced, or how the people calling on you, what have you seen there? And how do
So
you manage that?
it's reduced. I mean, our doors are locked, and if you show up and you don't have an appointment, you're probably not getting in. But if you may, early on when Colorado was in its worst stage, nobody went anywhere, and you just wouldn't. I wouldn't let anybody come in.
Hmm.
Now we have some of our tooling people. They have to get a letter from us stating we don't have anybody that's been sick. They
Hmm.
have to get approval from them. It's a kind of a big deal if you want. want somebody to come down here. And the reason we would want a tooling person to come in is if we're working on a really hard material and we need
Right.
their expertise in helping us do that. And we'll do that, but you can still see people. I mean,
Well, I'm thinking the tooling people probably used to just stop in if they were in the
they
area
did,
and say,
they
hey,
did.
and that's
That,
gone.
that won't happen now. Yeah. I mean, they couldn't even get in the place,
Right.
and
Right.
and that's happened. So they have to learn other ways to sell, right? I
Yep.
mean, the whole, of course, digitization again, the Zoom thing and all that is working. I mean, I used to have to drive downtown for my CAMA board meetings. Now we've been doing it on Zoom. I don't want to go back to where I'm driving downtown. I want to
Right.
continue
Right.
because it's 2 hours out of my day that I get back. So
Yeah.
the world's kind of changed, and we need to accept it and enjoy it, and figure out how to make it work to all of our benefits going forward.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed some of the insights we've gotten out of you. I do have one last question, Grady, and that
Mhm.
is Reata. That's not your last name. So how
No.
did you come up with the name Reata?
So I live on a small family ranch, and when I was thinking of the name, I didn't want it to be my name. I just wanted it so that it'd be a name of, if your parts were somewhere, or your customer, they'd kind of refer to you as that one word. And the American cowboy took most of its vernacular from the Mexican vaqueros, and a la riata is a lariat. And
Oh, yeah, yeah.
in the U.S., the Buckaroo Cowboys, they referred to it as a Reata, and I took back the Spanish name, and it's a Reata, and it's just a name from a lariat from living on a ranch and just wanting to kind of put a little Western on it, but and it also makes people ask all the time about it. So
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what about.
Well,
Well, I wanted to just say I really appreciate what your podcast is doing. I enjoy listening and learning from all the different people, and really want to encourage more and more people to listen to the shows and talk with you, and share their stories and information, because, believe it or not, I mean, podcasting and podcasts are a great way to get targeted information that you want to learn to help develop. And this one's done wonderful. And I've picked a lot of stuff off. I haven't gotten through all the shows yet, but I will. And every one of them I picked information off I've wanted to use for myself or for Rihanna.
well, thank you for the kind words. I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate that, Grady, and
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share your journey with us.
Sure.
I think too many times someone might look at you, or someone like you, or just a successful entrepreneur, and say, what a lucky guy. And I suppose you are, and we all are, but you had such a large part in creating your own luck, and you put in the hard work to make it happen. And as you talked about the Reata recession a couple of years ago, it doesn't mean that as you grow larger, you don't face challenges. So,
Right.
there's no guarantees, right?
Right.
Yeah. So congratulations to you for what you've achieved, and thank you for how you've given back to the industry, the NTMA, the Colorado Association, and including being on the podcast today. So
Yeah.
any last words, anything else you want to throw
No,
out there?
no, I just want to thank you again for what you're doing. And I really appreciate supporting the job shop world, because I think it's a very admirable type of business to be in. And we are the, contributors. This is where wealth starts and
Mm,
begins for the whole world and nation, is from manufacturers. And I think it's an area that we really need to, all of us, be proud of what we're doing every day, and the contributions we actually make to society. And it's been a wonderful part of my life to be part of manufacturing. And I
mm.
look forward to the last chapters of that career as I move forward here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where can people reach you?
They can go to our website, riataeng.com,
And
or they
Reata,
can,
I just want to spell that for
yeah,
folks. It's
yeah,
Reata.
eng.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then my email, and you're welcome to email me and I will answer you, is just Grady, Grady, at reataeng.com.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you for listening today. Such great stuff from an industry veteran and so much to learn and absorb. So, what are you saying yes to? I guess that's my challenge to you as a listener. Don't say no, say yes, surrender. And until next time, keep those spindles turning and those lasers cutting. Have a stellar day.